Johnny comes marching home again. Hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then. Hurrah, hurrah, oh, the men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. And we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Get ready for the Jubilee, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give the hero three.
When the US Army marched south in the spring of 1861, it was with the promise to break the petty independence movement in the heart of Dixie and put the cotton farmers back in their proper place, under the heel of Uncle Sam. When they marched home in 1865, a different country had emerged from the dust of this most brutal civil war. Slavery, that moral depravity and hideous blot on the face of the nation, as Thomas Jefferson once called it, was no more, and the century-old dispute between the states and the federal government was seemingly put to rest.
In 1863, hurrah, hurrah, old Abe ended slavery, hurrah, hurrah. In 1863, old Abe ended slavery, and we'll all drink stone wine when Johnny comes marching home. And we'll all drink stone wine when Johnny comes marching home.
I've traveled around this country from shore.
In wake of the US Civil War, industrialization was driven forward like never before. Railroads were built all over the country, seeking to connect the east coast of the United States to its vast territories in the west, while also expanding into the agriculturally crushed south. Rural Americans flooded into the growing industrial cities, seeking employment and a better life for themselves and their families. Often they found nothing more than hard work and cramped apartments. Conditions in the cities were rough. Working less than 12 hours a day was the exception. Children as young as 8 years were commonly put to work, and workplace accidents were so common that the men in the factories became more than just expendable to the owners. Naturally, many of the workers were not content with this. They demanded they may pursue their own happiness, as the Bill of Rights had promised them. This is in many ways the true birth of the homegrown American socialist movement. Unions began to spring up in these major industrial towns and organized workers on a national level for the first time, connected by the railroads they built themselves. The most important among them, the National Labor Union, boldly proclaimed, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. This should become their major slogan in the fights to come. With 600,000 workers standing behind them, they went further, challenging the wage system in principle, denouncing it as inhumane and an affront to the working class. The day would come during the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. The unionized workers, demanding the 8-hour day and fair pay, staged a strike covering an area reaching from Virginia all the way to the major industrial city of Chicago. The railroads were seized and blocked until the demands would be agreed to. No more transportation was to be done without them receiving their fair pay. Instead, the state sent armed militias to force them back to work, and when the workers refused, they fired. When even this did not manage to disperse the workers, the president personally ordered federal troops to break up the strikers. With blood still fresh on their overalls, they went back to work. But this would not be the end by any means.
Make a stand, then we might own those banks of marble with a guard at every door, and we would share those vaults of silver that we have sweated for.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Eugene Victor Debs was 22 years old when the Great Railroad Strike cut a scar into the consciousness of the American labor movement. Debs had worked for railroads in different capacity for the last 8 years. Even though he was an active member of a union at the time, he did not participate in the strike. In his young years a conservative by nature and a card-holding member of the Democratic Party, he saw no sense in it, favoring tariff negotiations over clashes with capitalist interests. But in the following years, confronted with violence used against the workers, and the only minor impact of honest union work, Debs grew more disillusioned day by day, and with it more radicalized. Working together with other railroad unionists, in 1893 he founded the first dedicated industrial union in the United States, the Great American Railway Union. Their resolve and effectiveness would be put to test in a major way the very next year, in the greatest strike since the bloody disaster of 1877. When the Pullman Company, a manufacturer of railroad cars and engines, experienced a recession in late 1893, wages for the railway workers were cut. At the same time, rents and housing costs in Pullman's own company town, where the workers were demanded to live with strict regulations, were kept at the same rate. This naturally drove many of the already poor railroad workers to the edge of absolute poverty. George Pullman himself, by this time a rich industrialist, refused to even negotiate with the rabble, so they went on strike instead. Debs saw an opportunity for his new union. In a coordinated effort, they sent dozens of organizers into Pullman's towns to recruit them for the American Railway Union. Even though according to company policy, unions were strictly banned, thousands signed up in the following months. Pullman threatened Debs with legal action, but instead of pulling back, he went the other way. On the 26th of June 1894, the American Railway Union called for a boycott on transport of all Pullman cars. Hundreds of thousands of workers walked off the job, refusing to handle any of the company's trains. Due to his former connections with several railway companies affected by the strike, the US Attorney General got involved. He immediately ordered the strike to be stopped as it interfered with government shipments. Debs did not comply. When it now came to sabotage actions by groups of strikers, who were destroying railway lines and derailing trains, the federal government sent troops to Chicago, where the situation was most dire. The American Railway Union attempted to call for a general strike of all Chicago unions to resist the federal government, but it failed. The strike was broken, with a few dozen left behind dead. Eugene Victor Debs was arrested. His time in prison was a transformative one for Debs. He entered the correctional facility as a dedicated unionist, attempting to improve the condition of the American workers, but at heart still a conservative. Once he left it, he was a dedicated socialist, believing in the necessity of radical economic and social change. According to Debs, what influenced him most were the writings of the German Social Democrat Karl Kautsky, and of course Marx's Das Kapital, of which he received a copy from a friend while in prison. In a speech which he gave in 1904, Debs explained his support for socialism. I am opposing a social order in which it is possible for one man who does absolutely nothing that is useful to amass a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars, while millions of men and women who work all the days of their lives secure barely enough for a wretched existence. He put his newfound views into action immediately, urging the American Railway Union to join him in the creation of a new party, the Social Democratic Party of the United States. Under their banner he would begin his political career and run for presidential office for the first time in 1900. But in order to better their chances, Debs aimed for unification with other unions and socialist parties. He reached this goal in 1901, becoming one of the founding members of the Socialist Party of America. All in all, he would go on to run as their presidential candidate 4 times in total.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
The founding platform of this radical party of a new type stated, "The Socialist Party makes its appeal to the American people as the defender and preserver of the ideal of liberty and of self-government." Their plan was to abolish the wage system as a whole and turn our factories to be controlled by their workers, a revolutionary political agenda that appealed to the poor urban workers, who flocked to the party like no others. In 1912, over 100,000 people were card-carrying members of the Socialist Party, and in the presidential campaign, Eugene Victor Debs held sway over 6% of the national vote, a massive success for a third party in the United States. This would be the height of their influence in the US though. In the following years, the party would suffer internal fracturing, with more radical elements splitting to found their own organizations. And finally, in 1918 and 1919, they would suffer 2 major blows that would drive the nails into their coffin.
Brother's gotta join the one big union by himself.
On April 6, 1917, President Wilson made his appeal to Congress to declare war on the German Empire and her allies. A war for democracy and against tyranny. They complied. And so the American involvement in World War I began, and with it the war against sedition on the home front. In June 1917, Congress passed the Espionage Act, and later in 1918 the Sedition Act, both of which were aimed to consolidate the American populace behind the war effort. It did not only prohibit to aid enemies of the United States, it prohibited any public statement made against the war effort or the armed forces in general, a severe restriction on free speech. The Socialist Party was opposed to the war from the very beginning, seeing it as nothing but an imperialist war waged purely for the interests of the upper classes. The opposition was usually loud and vocal, holding rallies against it while attempting to convince young men to not submit to the draft. In a now famous speech held in Canton, Ohio in 1918, Debs made an all-out declaration against the war. There is no original footage of this speech, but this extract was recorded by no other than Senator Bernie Sanders.
In the Middle Ages, the feudal lords and barons, the economic predecessors of the capitalists of our day, declared all wars, and their miserable serfs fought all the battles. The poor, ignorant serfs had been taught to revere their masters, to believe that when their masters declared war upon one another, it was their patriotic duty to fall upon each other and to cut one another's throats for the profit and glory of the lords and barons who held them in contempt. And that is war in a nutshell. It hasn't changed. The master class has always declared the wars. The subject class has always fought the battles. The master class has had all to gain and nothing to lose, while the subject class has had nothing to gain and all to lose, especially their lives. The ruling class has always taught and trained you to believe it to be your patriotic duty to go to war and to have yourself slaughtered at their command. But in all the history of the world, you, the people, have never had a voice in declaring war. And strange as it certainly appears, no war by any nation in any age has ever been declared by the people. And here let me emphasize the fact, and it cannot be repeated too often, that the working class who fight all the battles, the working class who make the supreme sacrifices, the working class who freely shed their blood and furnish the corpses, have never yet had a voice in either declaring war or making peace. It is the ruling class that invariably does both. They alone declare war, and they alone make peace. Yours not to reason why, yours but to do or die. This is their motto, and we object on the part of the awakening workers of this nation.
2 weeks later, Eugene Victor Debs was arrested, charged under the Espionage and Sedition Act, found guilty, and sent to jail for the second time in his life. This was a major blow to the unity of the Socialist Party, who were already in turmoil and internal debate over an event that had unfolded in Russia only a few months earlier. Lenin's Bolsheviks had seized power in St. Petersburg. The newly established Soviet Republic of Russia signed a peace treaty with the German Empire and soon broke down into a civil war between the new revolutionary government and reactionary forces. Both sides used terror against the civilian population of the countryside to achieve their goals, burning down entire towns and villages who stood against them. Within the American Socialist Party, a rift started to open up between those who saw Lenin's Bolsheviks as an example to be followed, demanding a more radical direction for the party, and those who opposed the violent seizure of power and terror tactics employed by them. While this debate was raging, the Wilson administration had already decided how to deal with socialists and other undesirables with seeming sympathies towards the Russian socialists. A wave of fear gripped the country in 1918 and 19, seeing Bolshevik and anarchist agitation behind every strike and riot in the country. This was referred to as the First Red Scare. Over 100,000 people were investigated by the head of the Bureau of Intelligence, J. Edgar Hoover. Thousands were arrested under the Sedition and Espionage Act during the so-called Palmer raids. Most infamously, around 500 residents who had not received US citizenship yet were deported to the Soviet Union. These were the biggest mass arrests in all of US history, and they broke the backbone of the largest socialist organizations, with the exception of the American Socialist Party. Their death blow would come from the inside. In 1919, Lenin himself invited the left wing of the Socialist Party to the newly founded Communist Internationale, but only the left wing. With their central figures, such as Eugene Victor Debs still in prison, the debate broke down into internal struggle and finally split the party into two. The left wing founded the Communist Party of the United States, while the Socialist Party slowly broke apart until they had no more than 10,000 members left in 1920. With this, the large-scale socialist movement in the United States came to an end. All parties, with the exception of the Communists, were reduced to minor factors within the country. The Communists reached their peak in the 1930s and 40s with a relatively high membership of 50,000, but had no real success in the elections. Then, even they were broken during the Second Red Scare, unfolding in the 1950s as the result of the Cold War, reducing them to a small party under more or less direct control by the Politburo in Moscow. socialists took part in the civil rights struggle in the decades to come and would oppose Reagan's confrontational politics towards the Soviet Union. But their significance is minimal. The organized left wing in the United States would only return in the 21st century.
Out of town, 'cause luxury makes the world go round. Read it in the papers every morning.
In 2009, the Great Recession hit the United States. Once again, after a long time in the waiting, the topic of social equality and income equality took center stage. When the hopes towards President Obama to resolve these concerns were disappointed, the urban parts of the country grew restless. In 2011, young protesters inspired by the occupation of Tahrir Square in Cairo during the Arab Spring occupied Zuccotti Park in central Manhattan and other parks in Fifth Avenue where Wall Street is located. These actions were repeated all across the country within weeks. Occupy Wall Street was born. The demands of this movement were as diverse as the people who took part in it. The central issue was income inequality and the power of financial institutions and wealthy corporations over the political system. Because of the unorganized nature of the movement, specific demands that were more than views of specific people were rare.
Inflation as a hidden tax to fuck the people. Prices go up. Do your wages go up? No. My wages didn't go up, but prices went up. Gas goes up, milk goes up, trains go up. How am I supposed to live? And this is all because our government prints too much money, starts too much wars, so they can sell their tanks, their guns, their missiles. Because that's all America exports. Is guns, missiles, and tanks. That's it. We need to bring production.
According to the prolific left-wing intellectual Noam Chomsky, Occupy is more than anything a response to injustices committed against the bottom 99% of society. The protests were mostly advanced by young people under the age of 30 who took to the streets to send a signal to who they saw as the 1%. Overall, just about 7,000 people were arrested during the entire duration of the first wave of demonstrations and occupations. Even though the protest fizzled out at latest by the end of 2012, the lasting impact on the American political scene can't be underestimated. The question of income inequality, social justice and wealth distribution has become a center of the political debate. Their slogan, "We are the 99%, has become a central motive of the American left wing. But their greatest achievement was most likely to pave the way for one of the most controversial Democratic presidential candidates in decades.
With his riches and his luxury. 91 ist der Räuscher, 91 mit seiner Schere so marschier. 99 sind mir. 99, 99, 99 sind.
Here
in our small state, a state that has led this nation in so many ways, I am proud to announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America. Today, with your support and the support of millions of people throughout our country, we begin a political revolution to transform our country economically, politically, socially, and environmentally. Today, we stand here and say loudly and clearly, enough is enough. This great nation and its government belong to all of the people and not to a handful of billionaires.
Bernie Sanders for the middle class. What a GOP wants to put our interests last. He's gonna give it to you raw, no hesitation. With the right ideas to lead this great nation. No handouts, no special interest groups. He don't lie to give votes, he's telling you the truth. And while the media wants to downplay him, he's still gonna fight.
When Bernie Sanders, the independent longtime congressman and senator from Vermont, announced his bid for the presidency in 2015, he was an outsider and a candidate unknown to the vast majority of Americans. He certainly did not seem like a serious contender for Hillary Clinton, who at the time was the undisputed candidate of the Democratic Party establishment. Despite this, his rallies and speaking events drew larger and larger crowds, clearly outperforming Clinton in that regard. Our reason for this was that Sanders picked up right where Occupy Wall Street left off, using many of the central issues surrounding income equality and social justice as the core of his campaign. He also used the image of the 99% effectively. But Sanders did not just put himself forward as a progressive. Sanders called himself a democratic socialist.
For civil rights ever since the first day, while other candidates still with their hands out. We do it old school, grassroots stand out. Cause this is our time to have a voice to serve. You fat cats had your chance, now it's our turn.
When I talk about democratic socialism, you know what I'm talking about? Social Security. One of the most popular and important programs in this country, developed by FDR to give dignity and security to seniors. And it has been enormously successful in reducing poverty among seniors. When I talk about democratic socialism, I am talking about Medicare, a single-payer healthcare system for the elderly. And in my view, we should expand that concept to all people. I believe that everybody in this country should be entitled to health care as a right, and the most effective way to do it is through a Medicare for all single-payer program. When I talk about democratic socialism, I'm not looking at Venezuela, I'm not looking at Cuba, I'm looking at countries like Denmark and Sweden. And you know what goes on in those countries? All of the kids who have the ability and desire go to college. And you know how much it costs? It is free. They have child care systems which are outstanding. They have public educational systems which are extremely strong. The retirement benefits for their elderly, much better than they are.
Sanders is clearly rooted in the tradition of the American Socialist Party before their breakdown during the early 20th century took place, working towards a political revolution within the electoral system. During his campaign, Sanders for the most part focused on a positive message, trying to push his political views into the public discussion instead of attacking Clinton. When he did attack her, he focused on her close ties to Wall Street and her large-scale donations received from corporations. Sanders' campaign was entirely funded by small private donations. In the end, Sanders was only trailing closely behind Clinton by about 5% and also lost the nomination closely, mostly due to pre-chosen superdelegates who voted for Clinton at the Democratic National Convention. The pressure she received from the left forced Clinton to revise some of her positions regarding healthcare and education during the presidential campaign against Trump. In more than just one way, Sanders opened up the way for people in the left wing of the party to openly discuss their ideas. More than anything, he created the possibility of a genuinely left-wing Democratic Party. His influence still extends into the current political climate of the US, and he continues to be a viable presidential candidate for 2020. If there's a single person or organization who picked up exactly where Sanders left off, it is the growing Democratic Socialists of America and their star on the political scene of 2018, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Civil rights ever since the first day, while other candidates still with their hands out. We do it old school, grassroots stand out, cause this is our time to have a voice to serve. You fat cats had your chance, now it's our turn. They say you can't win.
Women like me aren't supposed to run for office. I wasn't born to a wealthy or powerful family. Mother from Puerto Rico, dad from the South Bronx. I was born in a place where your zip code determines your destiny. My name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm an educator, an organizer, a working-class New Yorker. I've worked with expectant mothers, I've waited tables and led classrooms. And going into politics wasn't in the plan. But after 20 years of the same representation, we have to ask, who has New York been changing for? Every day gets harder for working families like mine to get by. The rent gets higher, healthcare covers less, and our income stays the same. It's clear that these changes haven't been for us, and we deserve a champion. It's time to fight for a New York that working families can afford. That's why I'm running for Congress. This race is about people versus money. We've got people, they've got money. It's time we acknowledge that not all Democrats are the same. That a Democrat who takes corporate money, profits off foreclosure, doesn't live here, doesn't send his kids to our schools, doesn't drink our water or breathe our air, cannot possibly represent us. What the Bronx and Queens needs is Medicare for all, tuition-free public college, a federal jobs guarantee, and criminal justice reform. We can do it now. It doesn't take 100 years to do this. It takes political courage. A New York for the many is possible. It's time for one of us. Vote for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on June 26th.
The 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered the public stage for the first time when she announced her campaign for the Democratic primary in the 14th New York district against the Democratic veteran Joe Crowley. Her core focus during this campaign was to discredit Crowley, who has been in Congress since 1999 as someone who bends over to corporate interests and has no interest or ability to represent the people of New York. At the same time, she presented a positive vision, naming many of the ideas that Sanders carried into the center of the political stage. Much like Sanders, Cortez calls herself a Democratic Socialist. Her campaign during the midterms was a clear success, managing to outbid Crowley in the Democratic primary. She now represents the 14th district in Congress and is one of several members of the Democratic Socialists of America, taking a seat with a Democratic ticket. In many ways, she represents a new, younger and more left-wing face of the Democratic Party, which is starting to align itself with the traditional progressives within the party. The Democratic Socialists played a role in this development, having gained almost 40,000 members since the election of Trump, becoming one of the largest third parties in the United States, and by far the fastest growing one. Overall, this growth in left-wing organizations is a novelty since the first Red Scare, and a sign that the United States is slowly returning to its homegrown left-wing ideals that shaped the face of the nation in the past. It is hard to tell what the future holds, but the fact that the last Hammer member of a socialist organization was elected to Congress was over 70 years ago before Cortes shows that major changes have occurred within the political landscape of the United States. One thing is certain though. The United States have a vibrant and diverse history of left-wing movements, parties and organizations that play key roles in the development of the country we see today. The idea that the United States is in principle opposed to socialist ideas can easily be discounted as nothing but a myth. At times, it was even those very socialists like Eugene Victor Debs who stood as one of the last bastions of freedom and free speech in this vast city upon a hill.
It's a verb, freedom is a verb, something never finished, never done. It's something you can fake, and it's something that'll break if it ain't something that you constantly become. It's a verb, an action and urge, as thermal as the barrel of a gun. And it happens out of need, it's a fire and a seed, and it's terrible for